Good morning and welcome to this session of the Tourette Association's virtual conference. I am Amethyst Johnson Creekay, the Manager of Information and Referral Services at the Tourette Association of America. Thank you for joining us today for Dealing with Employment. We want to thank our platinum sponsors, the Warner Fund and Pharma, as well as all of our donors and supporters for making this free conference possible. To support future educational programming such as this, please visit tourette.org/donate to make a contribution today. During the session, we would be happy to hear from you. Please submit your questions or comments using the question panel on the right side of your GoToWebinar player. We will collect your questions and address them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. It is my pleasure to introduce our presenters, Karen Volk, Scott Loaf, and Dave Brebner. Karen is an occupational therapist at the TAA Center of Excellence at Washington University in St. Louis. She specializes in the treatment of both pediatric and adult clients who are diagnosed with Tourette syndrome, Tic Disorders, ADHD, autism, and executive dysfunction. Karen is also a trained CBIT therapist and serves as the vice president of the TAA's Missouri chapter. In addition, Karen has also presented at conferences for the American Occupational Therapy Association within the span of her 20-year career. Scott is an adult with Tourette syndrome who has worked in the human resources field for 32 years. He has dealt with just about every facet in the field, from firing to hiring to obtaining reasonable accommodations for both himself and other employees. Scott advises employees, supervisors, senior executives, and other individuals with Tourette syndrome on employment issues. He also operates a camp for children with Tourette syndrome and serves on the board of the TAA's Wisconsin chapter. Dave is an adult educator who teaches the electrical trades at TAFE NSW. He is also a public speaker and career counselor. Dave is a passionate coach and mentor to young people, especially in the vocational guidance and career development areas. He was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome, OCD, and anxiety disorders during his early childhood. Dave is a professional member of the Career Development Association of Australia and has authored an online course titled Living with Tourette's. Dave is married with 6 children and lives in Western Sydney, Australia. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. Presenters, you may now go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you so much for introducing us. If you could advance the slide, please. Again. Advance the slide again, please. Thank you, everyone. I'm Karen, and I'm got the pleasure of introducing us. So we are going to be discussing today preparing with employment. In addition, we will be working on talking about interviewing skills and community resources, as well as work accommodations. Can you advance the slide? So as an occupational therapist in Washington University, I spend a lot of time working with clients who are at teenage level or early adulthood, and I work with them often with being able to identify what they would like to do within their next couple steps of their life. The way I do this is I work with clients often to be able to identify what they are good at and what they struggle with. So I often spend time with them, getting to have them know their strengths and weaknesses as a person to be able to move forward within these fields of trying to transition into adulthood and live on their own and have a job. If I'm working on employment, I also work with them identifying what they feel is a good fit for a job for themselves. And often within my practice fields, we are also working with them on practicing those job skills within the clinic setting. Additionally, what I do is help them with interview skills. And so through this presentation, you're going to get a little taste of all of this through the 3 of us speaking. Advance the slide, please. The first step as an occupational therapist is in what we all 3, as an occupational therapist, as well as the 3 of us recommend, is that we feel that you should get to know yourself as a person. As we all know, tic disorders do not just come with just tics. They often come with other medical conditions that are comorbid diagnoses, as you can see below. Often we want you to think about the things that you might need for work. These things can include thinking about your executive functions, such as your ability to manage time, follow directions, ability to think quickly on your feet. Your motor processing system, such as how you are able to micromanage your motor and vocal tics, how OCD tendencies or tics can interfere within the tasks that you may have to do within work, as well as being able to look at the other limitations you may have within from your comorbid diagnosis, such as fine motor limitations or balance issues that may interfere with working. Sensory processing is also something you may want to think about, as many of our clients who have tic disorders often have sensitivities to noise or visual stimulation or touch. And so it's something that you need to consider when you're thinking about what type of job you would like. Social skills are another thing that I also talk about, which is being able to interact with others, having good eye contact, being able to talk to others, being able to understand those social rules that might entail having to be able to be a good employee within a work setting. Additionally, the last thing I talked to clients about is self-regulation. The ability to self-regulate when you're frustrated or embarrassed is important, because if you are not able to handle that, it often causes issues within your work environment. So learning skills to do that and strategies to do that is important for you to be able to be successful. Advance the slide. Dave, do you want to start, or do you want me to start on this?
Oh, go ahead, Karen. I'll follow on with you.
So preparing for employment, one of the things that we recommend first is getting to know who you are, what you like to do. So having an idea of what you are good at and what you struggle with is important. We often recommend that you think about the past things that you have done and what you feel like are passions of yours, such as hobbies or pastimes that are things that you enjoy doing. As an occupational therapist, I always say meaningfulness is important within your day-to-day activities. So if you can find a job that is meaningful to you, it's going to make it a lot easier for you to be who you are. Get to let them know who you are as a person is important. So having this background of knowing what you like and knowing who you are as a person makes you a strong candidate when you're moving into the work field. Recommendations from us as a team is that we really feel like you should have a good understanding of these things that really turn you on. Do you have any further comments, Dave?
No, I absolutely agree. I think it's even neurologically, things that really switch on your brain and get your neurons firing, things that you really enjoy are really important. And I think the point that Karen made about really showing who you are as a person, that shows confidence. And the other thing is that, like one of my friends likes to say quite often, is that there's no point in trying to be somebody else. All those positions are taken. You got to be who you are. You got to be who you are. And I think that the world bows to confidence to a certain extent. And if you're confident in who you are and you know who you are, then you're in a really good position to present yourself. And as I said, I found a whole career now through what really switches my brain on, what really engages me. And I think the other thing I'd like to say is that also it's got to suit your value, your moral values, and that if you're doing something that really switches on your moral values and you really believe in what you're doing, you're going to be very good at the job.
Advance the slide, please.
Areas of trying to identify what would be a good fit job or fit or career for you is looking for jobs or looking for opportunities that might take you in the field that you're interested in. One of the biggest areas that might lead you to that is volunteering. And this doesn't matter if you're in high school, college, or an adult. If you're looking to switch careers, you're looking for a career, is volunteering. And this could be as simple as if you're interested in working with animals, working at a local animal shelter. If you have you're interested in science, maybe trying to hook up with a professional organization. A lot of times professional organizations have conferences, and they sometimes are looking for volunteers. You wouldn't be speaking, but you'd have a chance to network with other individuals, getting to know that. Or just attending meetings as a student of a professional organization, if you have an interest in that. If you have an interest in like working with children, then maybe volunteering at a local community center. But volunteering can often pique your interest, maybe even change your interest in realizing what you're wanting to do. Second area is looking for part-time or summer jobs. This is a good time to explore what you're interested in doing, especially this summer, because there is a really, at least in the United States, a really tight labor market. There are a lot of employers looking for jobs right now. So if you might have an interest in working in the hospitality industry, there's a lot of openings right now. Like you may be interested in becoming a chef or food editing. Well, maybe getting a job as a waiter or a dishwasher. It may not seem like it, but you're getting exposed to that situation. And the same with part-time jobs, during the school year or during the summer. One of the areas I have a special interest in, because I run a camp, is camping. And I've seen a lot of people come into camping jobs that then take them into careers such as teaching, recreation, or realizing they don't want to be a teacher. Or I had someone that was interested in being a teacher, but have to deal with kids so much, she decided to become a school social worker. So you may find that the job is an opportunity to explore your career and put it in and find not only things you like, but things that you don't like. In my field, I was in human resources specializing in labor relations, but when I went to school for that, I had a lot of former accounting students that were undergraduate because they realized they didn't like working with numbers. So you might find ways through your jobs and through volunteering, make a good determination what you want to do for a career. And in some situations, it might even lead into a job if you volunteer, if you get a summer job year after year after year, or during college, or an internship. I'm not going to guarantee it, but that is a good way of at least exploring what your interests are. Next slide.
Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit about researching your prospective employer. Now, knowledge is power to a certain extent, and I've had young people come to me and say, okay, I'd like a job. And you say, well, what sort of job would you like? And they don't know anything about what we do. They don't understand what sort of business it is. They're just after a job. And no one wants to really employ someone who just wants a job. They want someone with direction. So researching your prospective employer, in other words, find out all about them, what their plans are, where they're going. And Scott will probably talk about this a little bit further, but it also opens the door for really good questions later on in the interview stage, because you show that you have an understanding of who they are and what they do. And Scott will probably talk a little bit more about that. Dress to suit the company culture. Now, we have some of the trendier, younger, sort of progressive sort of companies here where people ride bikes around the office and have slides and balloons and all that sort of stuff. And then you have the more conservative offices, like if you're going to work for a big accounting company, you probably wear a suit. But when in doubt, I always believe you dress for an interview conservatively. If in doubt, dress conservative. I think you'd agree with that, guys. We do dress conservative.
Yeah,
you can't get it wrong if you dress conservative.
Yeah, dress like you're going out to a nice dinner is what I always tell my clients.
Like it. Excellent. Yeah, that's exactly right. Exactly right. And when you're going towards the interview, organise some great questions that you're going to ask that show interest and show that you're really thrilled about the job and you'd really like to do it. Research the common questions that you will be asked in an interview. There's a great site on LinkedIn, for instance, where it has about 26 questions, I think, and they have HR professionals answer those questions the way they would like to see those questions asked or answered. So work on that. Think about your posture. You know, as a student of educational neuroscience, I know that 7% of all communication is verbal, 7%. So your posture, how you come across, pardon me, how you come across, how you present yourself, your smile, your handshake, if you're allowed to handshake anymore. I don't know if you're allowed to handshake anymore, but you know, we sort of fist pump now in Australia. But come across, it's your whole demeanour. as I said earlier, the world bows to confidence, and to a certain extent, if you're confident in yourself, people catch that.
Can I interrupt for a second, Dave?
Sure, go ahead.
One of the things I would always suggest in this particular situation is that you do a practice run of an interview. That it's often important to do that with multiple different people and multiple different times. Don't do it just once. Do it at least 4 or 5 times, and make sure you are 100% comfortable answering the questions that you have as practice questions, because the practice questions often are going to come up like, what is your strengths? What do you think you do well? What are things that you feel like are weaknesses of yours? What do you think you could do in a problem? Things like that. And so it's important, if you have that down pat, you will never get bogged up with a question on an interview. You'll have a very good demeanor coming in, because you'll have that practice to the point where you feel so comfortable. We do the same thing when we do our presentations.
Exactly. As I like to say, with my exams, when I'm studying exams or something, I win by volume. I do it so much that it's normal for me. And when I come to the time when I'm actually being tested or interviewed or whatever, it's just another exercise, isn't it, Karen? It's just another exercise, just another turn. Let's advance the slide to the next one. Okay, can we advance the slide, please? Excellent, thank you so much. Now, one of the things I want to talk about is there are many reasons why you might not get the job. You know, they say psychologically 10% of people in the world will never get on with you. It's just the fact of life. And you may not get the job because someone's better than you with that amount of experience and stuff. Don't take it personally. You realise, you know, we go, when I came to Australia from New Zealand, I went for 33 jobs before I got the one I got now. And I had to just keep believing, keep going, keep believing. Honesty and vulnerability are not reflections of weakness. You know, we think that if we show honesty and vulnerability, we're not strong and we're not leaders and all this sort of stuff. No, people really admire honesty and vulnerability. And it's like when you have someone, if you're talking to someone with a very bad stutter, for instance, you'll give them the time of day, and you'll give them the time because you're a good person, and you see they're struggling. And if we've got Tourette syndrome, as I've had many times and quite badly in interviews sometimes, don't be afraid to be honest and vulnerable about what you say. I open my interviews, I always try and control the interview a little bit by coming in early and making a joke about my Tourette's, and it just kills the whole mystique about it. We often end up having conversations about Tourette's before we go into the interview stage. As an electrician, I often joke, I'm a teacher of electricians, I often joke that I tell my students the first day that they won't know whether I'm being electrocuted or doing what I normally do, you know, and that people love it. People love it. As Karen said quite rightly, do mock interviews. It's a big thing for me. Do mock interviews. When I'm career counselling with young people, I get them to do mock interviews with as many people as Karen said as he possibly can. So you get used to it, because when you get used to it, it kills the stress. The other couple of things I want to say is plan how you're going to get there. How you get to the interview, you want to be there 10 minutes early. You don't want to be too early, but you don't want to be too late. Definitely don't want to be late. And the thing is, plan how you're going to get there, because stress is our mortal enemy. As people with Tourette, stress is our mortal enemy. So you want to make sure that you're not stressed, that you're relaxed when you arrive. And that's one of the big things. I always allow myself, I sit in the car park for about half an hour beforehand and just think and meditate and pray and just get myself settled. And then I go in and I'm confident and I'm ready to go. And I'm not stressed out from missing a bus or having bad traffic or something like that. Next slide, please.
Okay, now that you're actually still preparing for the interview, for the actual job that you're going to be interviewing for, first and most important is you need to review the position description or the job description. For a job that you're applying for, there's probably outlines. What I look for are the essential duties. I'll explain why that's important later, but the essential duties of the job. If it's not necessarily in the job announcement where you apply, when you get to the interview, I would ask for the job description. then you're going to look for the essential functions. And many employers nowadays in their job description, position descriptions are going to identify what the essential functions are, because that's important for the employer, if needed, to defend if there is a complaint of a violation of the American Disabilities Act. But it's important to identify that, because you need to determine, is your Tourette's going to interfere or cause an issue or prevent you from doing any of those essential functions. And if it is, that would then move on to our next thing about you. At some point in the interview process or after you're hired, you're going to need to address, this is the essential function, I may have an issue with it, I'm going to need an accommodation. But if you're looking at the position description or job description, there's nothing that's necessarily going to, your Tourette's going to interfere. You don't have to tell your employer, the interviewers, about the Tourette's. But the question is, legally, you don't have to. And the only thing that an employer can ask or a interview is, do you have anything that might, or condition that might interfere with you performing the essential functions? You could say no, because your Tourette's is not going to interfere with the essential functions. But you need to look, to be honest self, is your Tourette's pretty apparent? I mean, if you're going into an interview with a lot of tics, the employer can't, and they shouldn't be asking you about it, but what are the interviewers going to think? How does that make you come off? So that's something you need to consider. Do you need or want to tell your employer, interviewee, about the position, or sorry, about the Tourette's? If you need an accommodation, my rule of thumb is the further you get along in the hiring process is before you ask for an accommodation. I mean, you don't necessarily need to do it until a job offer is made. But if you have something at that point, it puts you in a better position, because they want you. And now they say, okay, you have an issue. Is there something we can do in the way of the accommodation? But the more important point is, how is your Tourette's coming across? And then if it is, when do you tell them about it? Do you need to tell them about it, even though it's not going to interfere? Give you an example. When I was first interviewing for jobs many, many years ago, this was even before the ADA, I had a tic sniffling. I still have that now. It didn't interfere with my hiring, but I did not tell a lot of people around my job when I was hired about my Tourette's. And one of our managers went to speak, who was head of security at O'Hare Airport, which is one of the largest airports in the world, went to talk to my boss, thought I had a cocaine problem. So it was my sniffling. He explained what it was, and that eased our relationship once he realized that I didn't have a cocaine problem. That's a very extreme situation, but that's something I need, maybe should have been aware of when I was first hired on it. And then if you do need an accommodation, you're going to need when to ask for it. Again, I would probably push it back as far as you can in the hiring process, especially if they make an offer and they really want you, the more likely it won't be as much of an issue for the employer, legally or realistically. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, this first one is really a big one, is being prepared for the various type of interviews. If you've been to multiple job interviews, you're going to find no two job interviews are usually the same. A job interview, when I was interviewing for a job, might be one-on-one with a manager and a supervisor. Nowadays, you might have a phone interview or a now during the pandemic, a Zoom interview with human resources do screening. They might then bring you in for a second interview or a third interview. Your interview may be with one person, it may be with a panel of individuals. You might be with several interviews during the same day. You could have a panel with supervisors. They may have people who would be your coworkers interviewing you to get an idea of how you might fit into the employment atmosphere, the organization's culture on it. For an entry level job, maybe not as much, but a more senior job, you might get more types of interviews. And then in the interview format, you may have what are called structured or unstructured interviews. An unstructured interview, something that I do, because when I was working, I hired interns. I would look at the resume and ask them a question about like the current job or their experience. What is this one like or that? So the questions might vary depending on the applicant's background. In a structured interview, and this is what a lot of more employers are doing nowadays because it's more legally sound, is they're asking all the employee applicants the same question. It could be a question about your background. They can put it in, like what is the most difficult situation you dealt with? It might be something on the knowledge of your field. Like if you're in chemistry, they might ask you a question, or teaching. How would you handle this? They might also use a format where they're asking you, what is the most difficult situation you dealt with? Give us an example. Or they may run you through a scenario and ask you to analyze it, how you would handle it. Those are more of the structural interviews. I think you'll find that a lot more nowadays, because those are more legally sound, easier for an employer to justify on it. When you're looking at to answer these questions, as Karen and David mentioned, you need to know your strengths and weaknesses, or areas you need to improve. Your strengths, give examples of what that is. Like if I was interviewed for a human resources job now, I would say my strengths are analyzing a situation. Or because I worked in a lot in compliance, like making sure we comply with the policies, the laws, and if we had a labor agreement. I'd be able to give, okay, if you want to do this, here's what you can do, but if you do it this way, here are the risks and the benefits and the risks on it. That's what I'm pretty good at. And then also, I'm very good about letting people vent to the point of letting them yell at me sometimes. Maybe not the most productive, but sometimes to let them get out their, I'd rather have them yelling at me than yelling at a supervisor and getting themselves fired. So you need to know that and be able to give examples. And know areas what you need improvement. In my day, that used to be called know your weaknesses, but now we refer to it as areas of improvement and give examples of that. If I was interviewed, I would say one of my areas needs improvement. It's my first impression. It's not always my best impression. And sometimes people need to get with me. And then another area would be my writing skills. My writing skills and my proofreading leave a lot to be desired after all these years. A lot of it had to do with my Tourette's and other social ADHD when I was going through school. So when I'm sending something out to somebody, I might say, here's a draft, take a look at it. Please feel free to correct anything, including the spelling or if I missed something grammatically. So that's something that I would be prepared to discuss in a actual interview. And you would need, again, to show your strength and areas of improvement, whether it's an unstructured interview or a structural interview, like they're asked to give a scenario or a situation that you handle. You might go, okay, here's how I handle this. This may have not been the best situation to handle it, but it got the job done, but I would have done it differently, next time around on it. And then another area of interviewing, which Dave really hit on, is asking the questions of your interviewer. That shows you have an interest in that job. And some of the questions I've gotten people I've interviewed about, tell me what's the most exciting part of your job. Tell me what's the worst part of your job. Tell me what you like about the environment here, what you don't like about the environment here. So that shows you have an interest. And then also, in my day, we used to do research. It was a little hard sometimes to do research on company, but now that everything's available on the internet, you can probably find out something about that company or employer, and you might want to ask something about if you saw something on their website that interests you about, well, you worked on this project. Tell me about that. I've had people come in that ask me about the camp that I run. It has nothing to do with the job, but they obviously have done their homework and done the research. And that's kind of very impressive. Me impressive. This person's really interested in the job and is a good researcher. And a lot of the jobs I was hiring in, I needed people that could do research. So that was a good match. So those are really areas of, again, the most important. I would be prepared for any of those interview formats. Anybody else want to add anything? Next slide.
That's great. That's great, Scott. Give people the opportunity to get to know you. That's the main thing. I think one of the big thrusts we're saying. I would say that one of the reasons why I agree with the others that I don't necessarily mention my Tourette's in my application, and I wait to the interview, because people have got to meet our hearts. If they meet our hearts and they see that we've really conquered something and we've had a go at life, we're having a go at life, they'll meet our hearts. And when they meet our hearts, I think it overcomes a lot of other things. So give people the opportunity to meet you. I don't recommend, I don't know what Scott thinks about this or Karen thinks about this, but I don't recommend mentioning it at all in the application stage, because I don't want them to prejudge me. I want them to meet me as a person. Do you agree with that, ladies and gentlemen?
I think it depends on, you know, how you present yourself. If you are feeling like it is something that's going to interfere with that interview, I often say go ahead and disclose at that point. But if you think it's not going to be, I think it's better for them to get to know you first before you disclose your medical. So when I talk to my patients, I really look at like the person individually to figure out how their presentation is going to be within an interview, and is it going to be something that we need? So people who have more hidden disability, I always say hide it and then get yourself hired, and then you can disclose and explain what you need.
I would agree with that, but again, it depends how, especially with Tourette's, how apparent is it? Is it something that, again, you have 3 people sitting in a room interviewing you and you're sniffling or might take barking or moving around, they're going to be wondering, even though legally they can't ask you a question that's going to raise something in a way an employer is going to do that. They're not going to hire you. They're not going to tell you, oh, we didn't hire you because of your Tourette's. We just found a better applicant or a more qualified applicant.
That's right. Yeah. No, that's the thing. It's really on a basis of what the application's about, really, isn't it? Look. Let me just tell you a really quick story. I know we haven't got much time, but I want to tell you a really quick story. There's a lady in America who United States, who's got 6 kids, and she was in the supermarket one day, and she's got the story on her website, and someone commented on one of the children rudely, and she said, and she simply pulled out of her handbag a list of names, and the rude lady said to her, "What's that?" And she said, "This is a list of all the people that think I'm a wonderful mother, a wonderful wife, a wonderful person, and there's hundreds of people on this list, and you're not on it. Nice to see you. Bye." And so I always say to my young people, make the list. Make a list of all the people that think, as we say in Australia, you're crash hot, you're great. Make a list of all the people that think you're wonderful, and when you feel a bit rejected, read the list. So every interview has an opportunity to grow in expertise, as we said before. We talked about mock interviews. Treat every interview as a mock interview. In other words, at the end of the day, one day someone's going to say yes, and it's not going to be too far away. And the more confident you are, the more practiced you are, the better. Finally, I want to say, debrief with someone, and don't sit there for the rest of the day mulling over it. I am terrible at mulling over. I should have said this. I was an Indian. I said that. And what Brene Brown calls a vulnerability hangover. I don't want a vulnerability hangover. You don't want one of those. You want to get out and walk the dog, or go and see a friend and have coffee, or do something that basically takes you right away from the situation once you've done it. Because we all make mistakes. Nobody's going to do an interview 100%. When none of us
It can also help them. It can also help them be able to identify like what they did well. You know, you could also think about that as a positive thing, which is identifying what you learned in the interview. What did I learn that I could take to my next interview and use at my next interview? So when you debrief with someone, a lot of times that person can help, because you'll be in an emotional state at that point afterwards. You know, often when we leave an interview, we're also feeling very positive, or we're feeling very negative in regards to how we did within our interview. And so talking about somebody helps them help you remember what you thought about that interview, and what are things that you could take into the next interview. So it's a great time to just be able to gather that information on how to do, what to do within different situations as you move forward in your careers.
Well, it took me a long time to find my first position, but what I would used to do, and I think it's still valuable today, is if you didn't get the position, get a letter or email, whatever it is nowadays, I call the person and say, okay, how did I stack up against the person that got the job? What do you think my strengths and weaknesses were? And I had a couple of human resources directors who gave me some very valuable feedback during my interview afterwards. Don't come and threaten me like, why didn't I get the job, and complaining. Just that's a good source of where you get some information from about how you can improve for your next interview.
That's right, and don't take it personally, eh? Don't take it personally, because the reality is someone may have just had better experience or better qualifications than you. It might not be anything personal, and it may be nothing to do with your Tourette's. They might have really liked your Tourette's. They really might have liked your vulnerability. And the thing is, sometimes, as Karen said, sometimes when you debrief with someone, you say, I was such an idiot, I said this. And they go, oh no, that would have been a good thing to say, because you're in an emotional state. And the thing is, so debrief with somebody, walk away, tomorrow's another day, tomorrow morning's another day, everyone's alive, we're all well, let's try again. Let's just walk away and try again. I'm just looking at my notes here. Yeah, so that's basically it. And remember, make your list of the people that think you're great. Make that list, because basically I live off the fact that I'm part of a faith community, I'm part of a sports club, I'm part of all these people think I'm wonderful. So if there's one jerk out there that tries to have a go at you, well, the reality is, so what? Look at all the people that love me. I mean, it sounds, and I'm not saying that in an egocentric way, egotistical way, but there are a lot of people that think people are wonderful, and we if you're anything like me, you take notice, you ignore the 99 and you take notice of the 1% that don't like you, because I'm built for rejection of it. So you got to debrief and go and see somebody. Okay, next slide, please.
So the next thing we're going to talk about, the American Disabilities Act. Scott mentioned this just a little bit earlier in the slides as the ADA. The ADA was created in 1991 and revised in 2010 to 2016. It's a federal law that gives the civil right protection to individuals with disability. There is 5 titles. It is something that is only found in America, as this is the American Disabilities Act, just to give that clarity. Dave is on with us. Title 1 of this particular act states, this title is designed to help people with disabilities access the employment opportunities and benefits available to people without disabilities. Employers must provide reasonable accommodations to qualified applicants. This particular act is something that anybody with a disability can use as protection, meaning it is not something that, it is something that gives you just a standard of what your rights are within employment. So this would include anybody who has a tic disorder, Tourette's, ADHD, anxiety disorder, OCD, are all covered underneath this particular act. I find that reasonable accommodations are often confusing to most people, as it can be very different from a small company to a larger company. So I want to give some clarification in that. Smaller companies are 15 people or less underneath this act. Any company that is over 15 employees are considered a larger employee. Reasonable accommodation can vary significantly between these two types of groups, as the reasonable accommodation cannot put any type of financial stress on a company. So if a company feels, smaller companies are obviously going to have much more financial distress from an accommodation if it's a larger accommodation, such as installing a certain electronic program into their company may be really stressful to that company. Whereas something like asking, so a lot of times within smaller companies, you're going to find that they are asking for smaller things, such as, can I have written directions whenever someone gives me directions? So if they're verbally directing you throughout a task, you can request for a copy of the same directions written out. So if they have things that you want to do and they have to do for the day, instead of having them verbally tell you what your to-do list is, that they can give it to you in a written list. You can also ask for things like being able to micromanage your tics. You may ask for a tic break. That means that you can ask for, as needed, when I'm feeling very overwhelmed with my tics, can I have a 10 to 15 minute break to be able to just go and take a break somewhere else in a more private setting, to be able to micromanage myself and self-regulate myself, to be able to move back into my job. A larger company, you can accommodations may be a lot bigger, such as a voice activated software system or a specialized seating that can be used within a desk. So it's such as a specialized office chair can be purchased. Additionally, they can ask for things like handicap ramps and other things. But again, those are really large paid items. And so you have to keep in mind that an employer, cannot be financially distressed by this. The last thing I want to touch about is accommodations are a negotiation between the employer and the employee. they need to be agreed upon. So an employee can bring forth an accommodation, but the employer has the right to not agree to that accommodation and can make adjustments to it. So again, keep in mind that though you want an accommodation and you're asking for accommodation, an employer doesn't have to always give you that accommodation. That often you should bring it to the table as a negotiation process. And I think on our next slide, can you advance the slide? Thank you. So preparing for employment, we're going to be talking about reasonable accommodations. And I think, Scott, you're going to run this?
Yeah.
Or talk about this?
Yeah, I mentioned before about the company or the employer defines the essential function. That's something that is primary to the job. It varies from job to job, but it's something that you're expected to do as part of the job. This may be having to answer phones on a timely fashion, if you're a switchboard, versus if you're filling in for somebody one day a week for an executive answering a phone, that's probably not an essential function, or filling in for an assistant for an executive answering the phone. But if answering the phone, if you're a customer service rep, that's one that's going to be an essential function. And if you need to identify, again, from the essential function, if there's something with your Tourette's or other medical conditions that may interfere or cause an issue with that, you need to identify if you need an accommodation. You need to explain why you need that accommodation. One thing you might have if you're the customer service rep and you're on the phone a lot, I can't sit still, but you're expected to sit at a desk. One thing is like, okay, maybe I need the access to where I can get up and pace back and forth by my desk. So I need whatever the technology, the headset is.
Headset.
On that. And then the other thing is almost every employer is going to expect is going to ask for some medical documentation to verify this. Not just medical documentation that you have the medical condition, but that it may causes an issue with this, like a symptom, or like your tics or ADHD, your heart just can't sit still. Often, and I've seen in my career when I have employees that are looking for accommodation, the medical documentation only goes so far, that the employee's looking for something more. Or sometimes that the accommodation request is, I use this term, they've accommodated themselves right out of the job, that they cannot perform the essential function under any accommodation. Well, that's probably not going to, work, but that's a double-edged sword. Let me go back a little. This is a case I heard about. This was many, many years ago, around the time of the ADA. An employee put in a request for an accommodation due to anxiety. They needed all stress removed from their job. I don't know how the heck you're going to do that. But the employee won their case because the employer made no effort to try and reach an accommodation. So the employer has an obligation to do that. If the employer made a reasonable attempt to obligate that, they would not run into it. But the employee won their case because the employer made absolutely no attempt to do that. As an example that might come in with this, I'll use the one at work. Most of our workforce were in the field. So our employees were in the office maybe an hour or two a day, and then in the field 6-7 hours a day. And we have employees that develop medical conditions, have medical conditions. I can't work in the field anymore. I have a asthma, or I have COPD, or as an example. And so they ask for an office job. That's going to accommodate themselves right out of a job because we don't have office jobs for our field staff. And what we came up with was an example of this was if they needed a break, they were just to call in, when they need a break and how long it would last. And then they would then add that time at the end of their job because they get paid for 8 hours. We need 8 hours. We expect 8 hours out of them. So we have some employees that because of a medical condition, they could not always be at work on time because they might have a bad night's sleeping. So we set up a flex start time. If the job permitted, like our employees started at 7, 8, or 9, anywhere in between there. So this employee started at 8, so we set up, okay, you can start anytime between 8 and 9, but if you come in at 8:30, you're going to work to 4:30, so you get your 8 hours in. So those were some of the ones that, that we came up with. Again, it's not Tourette, but it's an example of what we can do. And like I said, the employee wanted an office job. That's not going to work. But we negotiated and came up with a something in the field, which kind of became a standard for a lot of our accommodation requests. It kind of was the template that we could kind of move off from. But again, the point is your medical documentation needs to match up what you're requesting. If it doesn't, you're going to have a problem getting that accommodation.
Do you want me to talk on that letter, on the medical letter for a second, Scott?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I work with clients all the time with who are requiring to have a medical documentation for usually for bigger companies. So it's not usually for like maybe working at a supermarket or a fast food restaurant, but it may be somebody who's maybe in management in a fast food restaurant or a store might need that, meaning that they are working in those jobs. What the letters usually is just a doctor's letter with stating that this client was diagnosed with this diagnosis, and these are the accommodations that they feel are the best for this person. Often the doctor will ask you what accommodations you feel are suited for them. Doctors often, if they do this a lot, will be able to identify if the accommodation is what they consider a reasonable accommodation or not. I will tell you within my field, when I work with clients, I often talk about reasonable accommodation quite often, just like Scott has mentioned, because sometimes a reasonable accommodation, something that they think could work, may not be something that they can ask for, or may not look, or may not, they can ask for it, but they probably won't get it agreed upon by their employer. So we often will look at that in a bigger sense. Just to give you a heads up of how that looks. The doctors usually will print that and then mail it to you. The Dan slide.
Well, let me on the where I worked, we had a form. We asked the employee to fill out. Here's the thing, and we gave a very complex form to take to their doctor or medical thing, which was very helpful. The doctor could add or thing, or sometimes the employee would bring us something detailed, which was enough. If not, we would send it to them. And the idea was to see if it was not to like. It was trying to help us figure out the best accommodation. And this form had been revised over the years as things had come up. But it was something that really helped in finding the accommodation on it. Not all employers.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen those forms too, Scott. I think they're often larger companies will use that type of forms, which I think is awesome.
And then on the accommodation, one thing I found, we list a lot of examples here, but one thing that we have found, if you've had something that's worked in school or another situation, home, with yourself, that's something you might be able to ask the employer. I know in my career, one of the things, modification of work hours, that's been a big one that's been able to resolve it. And in my employer, we were in a unionized situation. So almost 95% of our employees were covered by a collective bargaining agreement. Now, that became a little more difficult because the collective bargaining agreement like set the hours, but we talked to the union, the employee, and we get, we also make the adjustments. And some of the other areas you've already hit on was the speech activated software. I actually tried to start using that. I didn't ask my employer to buy it. I bought it for myself because I wanted to use my home computer, but it didn't work with the vocal tics. But that was something that could be on it. And it could be a modification at your desk. We've had simple as having to, nowadays we see a lot of employees have these stand-up desks. I don't know what they call it. They stand up, sit, move around. We've used those a lot. I know if I give one of my examples, an accommodation I got, I didn't even ask for. It was kind of fit into a situation. When I was working, when I first hired, I was working in an office, in an office building. I had my own office. We were a large section. We had a human resource large section. And then we were merged with our payroll section out at O'Hare Airport. And I went from an office to a large open area. You want to guess what that did with my vocal tics? they went off the scale. And I was really disturbing a lot of people around the area in the office with it. They were understanding because they had Tourette's. But we had, on the second day I was there, I had the second highest person in our organization walk by. He said hello to me, and I said hello to him. And then I blurted out his nickname. This is a nickname that no one would ever say, because it was kind of a little bit derogatory. And I went up and apologized to Tourette's. He goes, I understand, Scott, don't worry about it. Then he walked very quickly over to my boss's office, shut the door. You talk about being worried. I thought, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job. I found out later they were laughing their heads off because nobody would ever think they'd do such a thing. And then my boss went to the personnel, the human resources manager, and mentioned that he fell off his chair laughing because no one would ever do this. And the response was, I have got to get Scott in office. It took a couple of weeks. They cleared out a conference room, moved some stuff around, but I got it. That's an accommodation I would have loved. I didn't ask for it, but I just got it from the circumstances. So sometimes you might find an employer that's got a good situation where you get an accommodation without even having to ask for it. And some of the other areas for accommodations, again, you mentioned the break. You might, if you're working like on an assembly line, that may not be the easiest situation. Or they might move you if you need to, like I said, get up to walk around. They might move you to a side, move you to an area to where you can pace. Or if you need a break, like we just have some of our employees, okay, we'll give you take a 15-minute break, but you're gonna have to tack that on at the end of the day. That's still a reasonable accommodation. I had someone that came to me after they got fired from the job because of their Tourette's, but the accommodations they were asking for was like, I need 2 hours to play on the computer. That's not an accommodation. And I wish he had handled different. He had found a different job, so it was kind of just. He just wanted to try and get back to his old employer. I said, it's not worth it. Just time to move on. You got a job better you like on it. And then some of the other ones, Karen, you've listed here about recording devices are good things. But you need to determine what your accommodation is and work with your employer to figure out what's best, what works for them, or what works for you. The last time I saw, a lot of accommodations don't cost a lot of money. So even if it's a small employee, you might be able to, like those stand-up desks are not going to cost that much money.
Those stand-up desks, actually, depending on which type you want, are pretty costly.
Okay,
we have a couple at our office. The other thing I was going to mention is that something that's really cheap and easy to have is sometimes if you're really a person who really feels like they're easily distracted, playing a lot of times employers will allow you to play music through your headphones. You do need permission for that, but a lot of times, like even in my own job, I will put on mindfulness music, which really helps me to focus and attend within a loud, especially within my office where I have 2 or 3 people who are walking around, so I can be able to type my notes. And so I find that you can use something simple like that, and you just need to let them know that you're using it to help you facilitate your work, not just not doing it to entertain yourself.
Well, if you usually
don't start singing loudly in the office.
The one thing, if you easily get distracted and you work in a public office, we might move your location to an area where there's not as much public traffic. I mean, we actually had that. It's not terrestrial. We had someone that was allergic to smells or fragrances, and we're in a public office, so they were moved to the most furthest remote area, so there was a space between them and the public. On it. That's the one that was difficult. We thought it was going to be difficult to handle, but it was just simply relocating them.
One of the other ones I've heard is that I have a client just within the last few months who has a lot of motor tics. It causes them to have issues with their balance and standing, and they have a job at one of our local stores as a cashier. And so we recommended that they ask if they could have a chair at their desk. And Though at this particular location, they didn't typically have chairs there, the managers did allow to move a chair within that space and be able to use a chair for them to do their job.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah.
So, anything else on accommodations? Do we either have?
No.
Next slide.
So when we talked about those medical letters, these are a couple different specialists that can help you get the medical letters. So medical doctors that are primary care doctors, as well as neurologists or psychiatrists, are all types of doctors who are commonly writing these particular letters. I work with all of them on a day-to-day basis to be able to write accommodation letters. Occupational therapists, like I mentioned, often help with identifying accommodations, so they cannot write the letter for you, but they can help you with identifying what type of accommodations are a good fit for you, and can be able to facilitate, they can help facilitate the process with the medical doctor to create the letter for you. Vocational rehab specialists, or we're going to talk about in just a second here. So can you advance the slide? So vocational rehab is a federal and state funded program in the United States. It was created in 1973 through the Rehabilitation Act. What I think of it as is an unemployment agency for people with disabilities. So anybody with a medical disability can access this particular agency for assistance with being able to identify jobs, to be able to help you with interview process. They often have classes that they run that help you prepare on interview questions. So they teach you what the interview questions could be like. They talk a lot about like what Scott talked about with formatting of interviews. They let you practice runs with the specialist to be able to practice mock interviewing, things like that. Additionally, they also have supports to be able to help you with transportation. So a lot of times they may give you reduced fare on trains, buses, things like that, ticket type things, and they can help you facilitate that. They also have the ability to help do driving evals and identify different types of things that can help modify your vehicle, and they can help with the funding for that, meaning they often have connections within the local community to help with funding. So often if we're finding that they're having a hard time finding work, we may recommend that. So I have a couple of my clients that have used this. Often what I find that they have trouble with within vocational rehab is if you don't come in having a good understanding of what you can do, your strengths and weaknesses, like we've talked about a lot today, it's going to make it really hard for them, because these particular agencies are great, like just like any other employment agency, in finding you a job. They're going to find the job that you think you want. If you don't know that that job is not a good fit for them, they're not going to be able to identify that. That's not their job to identify if you're a good fit for this job. Their job is to find you a job that you're looking for and help give you the resources to do that job. If you're really struggling with that process of trying to figure out what is a good fit for you, you may want to go back a few steps. And like I said, what I do as an occupational therapist and what a lot of occupational therapists do is in this transition period of trying to find work, we try and help with that support. But there's a lot of people like Dave and Scott who are out there who can help facilitate that process a little bit. So looking for somebody who maybe is in your local community that can help work with you on identifying what is a good fit job for you, can help you facilitate being able to transition into it. Advance the slide. And this is the time that we have to have anybody who has questions, ask us questions. And we have about 20 minutes to 30 left here to be able to answer any questions that you guys have.
Thank you, Karen, Scott, and Dave, for an excellent presentation. We are now going to begin the Q&A session, as Karen mentioned. As a reminder, you can still submit your questions through the question panel on your control panel. If we are unable to get to your questions that you submitted, we will be following up with this session. We will be following up this session with a response by email. If you have a more pressing question that you'd like answered over the phone or by email, you can email me at support@tourette.org. Again, that's support@tourette.org. Or you can call at 1-888-4-TOURETTE. That's TOURET. Okay. The first question comes from Alexi. Could social workers or psychologists write accommodation letters?
So social workers or what?
Or psychologists write an accommodation letter.
So social workers probably don't have the legal stance to write a medical letter, but a psychologist can.
Okay. The next question comes from Julianne B. When I interview, sometimes I forget the original question because my brain goes into overload. Does this have a name, or how do you recommend it be dealt with?
I
can talk on that.
I would ask them to repeat the question. on it. Make sure you get it correctly, and then focus on that, or to try and focus once you're done answering, to focus on the question that is being, when they're asking it.
A suggestion I also have is, if you're doing your mock interviews beforehand, you can have, I often tell patients to write up the different information, kind of like written on a piece of paper, of like strengths and weaknesses, and then having like some bullet points underneath it. Weaknesses, maybe what my example story is, you know, just giving a word or two. So it kind of cues your brain. So as you're listening to the question, you could quickly look down at your list and put your finger on that question, that item that you want. What you're talking about in regards to the reason why you can't do that is that your brain automatically shuts down cognition. This is something I talk a lot about with my clients, is that your brain's stress reaction, the first thing it does, that stress hormone, is shut down cognition to allow you to progress within whatever you have to do to get you out of the situation that you're in, that your body identifies as stressful. So that's a normal human reaction. And I think what Dave might be able to say is that those practice interviews that we've talked about multiple times would be a huge help for you, because the more you practice, the less likely you're going to hit that nervous point, because you're going to be like, oh, I know the answer to that, and then just say it. Dave, do you have a comment?
I find that if I panic, my frontal lobe will lock up, and the frontal lobe is where the executive functioning is happening. And a lot of us Tourette's people have troubles with executive functioning. And so if you panic, it's like panicking in the test. If you panic in the test, your frontal lobe locks up and goes to the survival mode. And then, as Karen said and Scott said, basically what happens is you lock up, and then that's not a good place to be. So the more practice you have beforehand, and even look, I've done that. I've had that situation, and I've just done a big sit back, deep breath, looked up, looked down, and just settle yourself and tell yourself it's okay and carry on. Look, and then as Scott said, ask to repeat the question. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's fine. Look, you know, you're hopefully by this stage they know about your condition and you're doing well. And the thing is, some ways they'll be looking to see how you handle stress. So take your time. I don't think you would rush into this, would you? You try and just settle yourself and start again. Yeah.
And it's okay to say that you're stressed. I've done that in multiple interviews. Said, oh, I'm so sorry. I just got a little nervous. Could you repeat the question for me?
Yeah, exactly. Vulnerability is not a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing.
Okay, thank you. The next question comes from Catherine F. Other than CBIT, any general tips for tic management in a white-collar workplace? Any thoughts on sharing your TS with coworkers and supervisors, and the potential for preconceived bias regarding your performance?
Strategies that are outside of CBIT, because I'm a CBIT provider, is we recommend, like I talked about, a lot of times looking at what self-regulates you. So I often tell people to think about in the past. Often if it's a child, I tell parents to think about like when they were a baby, what made that child as a baby calm. So were they a kid who really calmed with rocking, or putting a pacifier in their mouth, or listening to music? And that kind of helps guide your body. So often, like within a workplace setting, you can use headphones to listen to mindfulness music, which will help calm your body and decrease your stress. There's a lot of research on that helps with decreasing anxiety, which it decreases your tics. If you're an oral soother, you can use gum as well as candy within those settings. I also recommend drinks with straws, because it helps regulate your breath as you're taking sips with straws. If you are a person who regulates through pressure, I recommend asking if you're sitting in a desk setting, you can always ask for use of a blanket, and you can bring in a weighted blanket during that time frame. And trying to think if there's any other ones. Oh, if you're a person who regulates through movement, you can ask for a chair that maybe gives you a little bit of a rocking element to it. So there's a lot of office chairs that give you movement to be able to rock back and forth in, as well as allowing for maybe some walking breaks to be able to give yourself a break to be able to move around. Do you have any other comments, Scott or Dave?
Well, just in general about if someone's in the workplace, it's like anything else, educating your coworkers, your supervisors, especially if your tics, like I gave that example when I blurted out that word. Everyone in the section knew I had Tourette's, so actually brought I heard some laughter from it, but it was just because of the education and the fact that my boss supervisors up to the second highest person in our agency knew about it made it a lot easier. So the education, because it's like anything else, you explain it to them. If you don't explain it to them, that's a you, but explain it to them, they're still having problems or getting harassment, that's going to cause, that's on them as well. So I think the more open you need to be with it. I mean, I deal with a lot of my coworkers know about it. People know, but if I'm dealing with one person once to the public, I'm not going to my job at work is not to educate the public on Tourette's, so I'm gonna just be in and out. So just to make sure the people around me know what's going on.
And the next question comes from Dawn D. My 15-year-old has his first job at Wendy's. It's tough to find jobs as a 15-year-old. They put him in the drive-through window and he is struggling with his vocal tics, coprolalia, and anxiety. I'm trying to make him tough his way through it, but he is really stressed and his tics and compulsions are getting out of hand. Is it harmful to have him continue to work there?
I don't think it's harmful, but he can ask for a reasonable accommodation to be moved to the indoor counter space if that makes it easier. Or another reasonable request is that he could be asked, they could ask him to be shifted over to another job, such as working the food line. Those are within fast food, they often train within multiple different positions. It's very possible they may say no, but it's something that if you explain that the anxiety of being at the window is increasing the tics, and that if he's in a position that doesn't have as much one-to-one type interaction, they may give him the accommodation to shift into a different position, because the company may be able to shift another employee from a different position into his position, because within a Wendy's type situation, there's multiple employees.
There may this
and
is
they often cross train.
This is on the accommodation issue about when your accommodation may affect another employee. If I'm going to use this is a slight example, but if it's in a unionized setting, if it violates the labor contract, it'd be an unreasonable request. And if the employer has a long-standing practice and that would violate it, that pretty much would also be considered, unless case law I saw that would be an unreasonable situation. But it can't hurt to ask and to explain. And then if that didn't work, if you really wanted to, ask for that, is maybe go to corporate on it or on it. But I would first start with the lowest, start your way up, asking your supervisor, have them ask the supervisor for different assignments.
Yeah, because most likely my understanding within Wendy's is that they hire those clients. My daughter is 18, so often within a fast food restaurant, they are hiring to put you into multiple different positions. So reasonable. So when Scott, you're talking about the actual essential duties, their essential duties would be listed as multiple things that they could do within that company. And most of these fast food places are very comfortable with, it's not unusual for people within those settings to have to shift from one position to another. My daughter's company that she works in fast food, they've trained her in multiple different positions. So I don't think you're going to have too much problems. I think it is detrimental to keep the child, if they can, to teach them how to advocate for themselves within this job. And if they lose the position, the thing is that now you have experience to know what they need to talk about to their next job when they do interview for another job. Does that make sense? That if they're going to another fast food restaurant, they could say, I would love to work in your company, but I know that working as a cashier or taking orders is something that I feel like is too distressing for me. I would be best as working the food line or working the front of the house where I'm cleaning tables and doing the refill of the drinks and so forth.
I'm frankly surprised that they haven't picked this up, aren't you, really? I'm frankly surprised that they haven't picked this up and moved him somewhere where he's a little bit less public. I'm quite surprised at that. I don't know why they would be doing that, you know.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, but sometimes there are employees, and you know, don't be surprised. You know, there are some employer, you know, some bosses that are very, very, very accommodating, like Scott's mentioned, and then there are some that are just not accommodating. And so it's just hard to tell like how they were going to react to a request. But if you bring it to them, you know, with good reasoning, and give them another way of, and give them a solution that you think is a reasonable accommodation, meaning shifting to another position is a reasonable accommodation within this job, that would be okay. What Scott's talking about, like within a bigger company, like a larger corporation, that may not be as okay, meaning they may not have another spot for them. But in a smaller company like this, I do believe that that would probably be an okay accommodation.
There's also something should cover about where do you ask for the accommodation. Like if you're at a Wendy's, it's going to be the supervisor or the general manager. At a larger corporation, they're probably going to advertise it, you know, because the postings are requirements. But you might probably want to look at human resources department as the starting point.
And you won't need a medical letter most likely for Wendy's for this, unless they request it. Does that make sense? But my guess is that that you might be able to just verbally request this first. And then if they do ask for that medical letter, you know how to do that now.
And sometimes accommodations, I'm thinking of accommodations that we have, it is as simple as switching a job assignment, which doesn't, this was in a unionized setting, but it was just, one employee was having trouble doing this particular assignment. We moved into another one that excelled at it, one because there was a disability, but it just worked. It just worked as the way the person learned that during their probationary period, the way they learned the job. They had to go from doing the work to having to like evaluate the work. And so we changed their assignments and it worked out fine. We got a productive employee out of it.
Okay. The next question comes from Dawn B. What is the process of bringing a 504 plan into a work situation?
Depends on what the work situation is. Most 504 plans are considered a federal document. So I have heard of some of my adult clients using 504 plans, which is like a written letter of accommodation. Like we've been talking about, like a medical letter of accommodation. Often they can, if you're bringing it in, you have to make sure that those accommodations, because they were set up for a school setting, are going to also be beneficial within that work setting, because often they're setting those accommodations up for a school setting. So it may not be, you know, parallel, meaning they might have things on there that you need, but you may need additional things for work, or you may have things on there that maybe school work environments will not even allow that school environments would. So you have to kind of look at those accommodations. Again, I don't think it's a bad idea to try it if you feel like those accommodations are fitting for you.
Okay, the next question comes from Amy W. How should my teen with TS address her coprolalia if she wants to work in a preschool as a helper? I get she has the right to apply for any job, but I'm sure parents do not want their young children to learn some of her words.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. I had this situation actually, and look, there's a point where I think we've got to, as a community, also think about other people in the community. We can't be selfish about our Tourette's. And the thing is, there are other things that this young person could probably do that are very similar related. The person's obviously in a situation of being a community minded and perhaps teaching or something like that, where in high school was something fine. I've had someone in high school with coprolalia, and that's been fine because the kids are old enough to understand. But look, I think it's, in my own view, I didn't promote that idea, because I think there's some things that just have to wait. And of course, my tics change all the time. So maybe up the track, I had coprolalia when I was a teenager. I don't have it now. So perhaps it's a wait and see or get trained and wait and see. But it's a very difficult situation that, because I mean, some people are really into their rights, but at the same time, we've got to be community minded and think of other people as well. So I'd be interested to hear what Scott and Karen have to say about this. But
Yeah,
I've actually
she
had
could.
a situation.
I was going to say that I have had a client who had this same situation going on, and they were lucky because their mother was the teacher within the preschool, and she was helping within the preschool that her mother worked within. And so they were able to micromanage it because she had a feeling of an urge when she knew that it was about to come on, that she was to be able to actually step out to a private setting to be able to let her tics out. And if it became difficult, the mother would provide her with other external tasks that she could do in that private setting to prepare for the classroom activities. And so it's possible, if she has somebody who she's a really good friend, that she could potentially work within that setting, but with some definite accommodation set up. And again, I would probably recommend that she have awareness of whether or not she is able to identify when that's coming on, because I do agree with Dave that that we do not want to put her in a position that she's going to put risk factors into place for other people. And we don't want to end up causing her more distress because of that, because parents are especially at that age range, are very overbearing. And so we don't want her to have such a negative experience on her first experience with working. So again, another suggestion for an alternate type job might be that she do online tutoring, because again, she can mute herself when she's having these tics. And she can work with and still be able to help younger children, work with children. Scott, do you have a comment?
Well, I'm thinking this was a case many years ago in Michigan. Someone was working front end as a grocery store. I had Tourette's and really developed a bad case of echolalia, and the manager was getting complaints from the customers. So the company said, we need to move you to the rear end of the operation of the store, where you wouldn't have as much customer interaction. He didn't do it, got fired. He sued under ADA and lost, because I remember reading this case, the court said something about that it was something the public had an expectation to be free from, that type of situation. I mean, the company took the proactive, trying to find him no change in hours or schedule or pay, but different job assignment, didn't take it, ended up losing the job. So that's the closest thing I've had to dealing with that, or seeing that. So something to take into consideration, that the public's view of the Tourette's can affect an employment situation.
I do work with clients often with CBIT to work on their coprolalia, and I do find that it is helpful. So it is a helpful treatment process if you were thinking about looking for treatment for it.
Okay. The next question comes from Amy L. How can you explain how your Tourette syndrome is an asset to you as an employee, and how it could be an asset to the organization?
Well,
may I jump in? Go on, sorry.
Well, go ahead, Dave.
May I jump in on this one?
Yeah.
I don't know how it is in America, but I believe that 99% of people out there are really good people. And 99% of people out there recognize that when you're struggling, they will help. I still believe it's a good world, And I think that for me, in my different as an electrician, when I used to have my own business going into people's homes, everyone wanted to see the electrician with Tourette's. I mean, it was kind of funny. It became my unique selling proposition, as they say. But look, I think companies get a lot of kudos from actually hiring people with things like Tourette's, because companies will see that you're a compassionate company, that you look after people, and I think that says a lot about the company. And I know that as a teacher now with Tourette's, I have no trouble. In fact, I think it gives a really good name to my organisation, that they accommodate people like myself. I think it's a certain amount of social, being a good corporate citizen, a good social citizen. So I'm losing my voice. Go ahead. Anybody else?
Well, sometimes I had Tourette's, my volunteer work on my resume. So it was one way of using it as a selling point on the to get the hiring, or to get hired on it. It could be used as that. It could be led into, if you did volunteer work with Tourette's, leads into a conversation during the interview process. This was years ago, I had an employment agency that was specializing in placing people with disabilities. They contacted me. I came in for an interview. They wanted to try and use me to change jobs. I was not interested in change jobs. I turned them down, but they want to try and use that to, look, we place someone into a human resource position with a disability. So sometimes it can be, and those of you that are looking for jobs, there are some employment agencies that do specialize in trying to find positions for people with disabilities. That's one possibility. You have to do your own research, because they're not that many, but there are some that I do know of.
And I often.
Sorry, Karen. I'll come after you. You go first.
I was just going to say that, I have a good friend of mine who's a teacher who even wrote a book on it, named Brad Cohn, and he would tell you that, for him, he found that within the working setting as a teacher, the school that he ended up working at after many interviews was a school that really wanted to use that to show that, anybody of any ability can work within our building. And it became a thing that often, I will tell you, was a very positive experience for the children within the classroom, as well as for himself. And that's how he ended up writing that particular book, and then being able to be an advocate himself.
Excellent. Yeah, I when I was very young, an old friend of the family, who apparently was an architect or something, said to me as a young fella, Dave, in architecture, if we can't hide something, we make a feature of it. So I've decided to make a feature of my Tourette's rather than hide it, because let's face it, we stick out in the crowd. We can't hide something. So if you can't hide something in your life, make a feature of it. And that's where I've gone with it. And you know what? It's been fantastic. It's like I said, most people are wonderful, and I know Brad Cohen's book and seen the movie, and it's astounding how people, we can't deny people the opportunity to grow too. We're not here to be convenient for everybody else, we deserve to be here as well. And I mean, as long as we're respecting other people's freedom, we deserve freedom as well. And that's what I think.
The next question comes from James K. Please expand on when you should disclose that you have Tourette during the application or employment process. Can you still get accommodations later, or have legal protection if not disclosed until a later time?
I can address. You need to, if you need, I have, if the Tourette's is not apparent, you can't hear me?
No, you're fine now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, technical problem. I would wait as long as you could in the employment process to mention, Tourette's if you need some an accommodation. That could be even after you're hired. But something to keep in mind, that if there's something with your Tourette's is interfering with your job, it's affecting your performance, and you don't mention it, and then the company starts disciplinary process or even moves to terminate you, you're not going to have the protections of the ADA. So you need at some point, if it's affecting your employment, or if you need an accommodation for that essential function, you're going to need to ask for it. But again, if it's not apparent in the employment process, or the hiring process, the interview process, then wait till you get hired on it. But again, you need to mention it. Your employer needs to be aware of it in order for the protections of the ADA. If you don't mention it, like you mentioned it, I had someone mention a disability after they were fired and they were appealing it. That's not going to work.
Okay, the next question comes from David S. Can you please discuss how to go about requesting workplace accommodations under the ADA? Also, how to respond when accommodations are not met or firing occurs because of tic symptoms?
Well, the ADA is just a law that protects you with it, so you don't have to necessarily you can certainly use the ADA within your language to say, hey, this is an ADA accommodation request, but it is not something that you actually have a formal letter that will come from the ADA to start with, because it's a federal law. How to request it? There's multiple different ways of requesting, like we've mentioned before. You could you could have a verbal meeting where you can ask your employer to sit down and talk about accommodations. You can request a medical letter from your doctor to have a letter that has these accommodations written out. Or like Scott mentioned, there is also sometimes once you meet with your employer, they may even ask for a form to be filled out by a medical provider or by yourself to identify accommodations and the reasons why you're asking for those accommodations. So there's a multiple different ways of doing that. Can one of you, Scott or Dave, talk about legal stance in regards to if a person was fired because of?
If you were feel you were fired because of your Tourette's or disability, you have a right to. If first of all, if you have an appeal process with your employer, you should use that. Don't necessarily to, but you can file a complaint. Something to keep in mind, like I'm in Chicago, I'm in Illinois, so there is a state law and a city law that mirror the ADA. So you may have multiple choices to filing a complaint. It's been many years since I dealt with a complaint from the EEOC, which covers it. But usually file one, the employer would respond, then the EEOC could take a year to get back to you, make a decision, a determination to say, okay, we find substantial evidence, which then means that the EEOC could file a lawsuit, but they only file lawsuits on less than 1/10 of 1% of the cases they get, or they issue you a right to sue letter, and then you got to go find a lawyer to handle it, usually on a contingency basis, which means the lawyer's got to figure they got to make some money off of it.
Yeah.
There are some like in Illinois, there's some local agencies that are self-enforcing. So you really look, there may be something locally, depending where you're at, state or local law that mirror the EEOC. Some of them have what are called deferrals that if there's a local agency or you file the EEOC, they'll send it to the local agency. The local agency will investigate it. Then the EEOC may necessarily review it. So you might get two cracks at the apple.
Yeah, and other states, Scott, just like what you're talking about, like, because I'm in Missouri, I would say that there's what I wouldn't necessarily know of it as EEOC, but I would know of it as self-advocacy. So a lot of times there is people who are out there that are what we call self-advocacy type people who will actually advocate for your rights within employment as well as within the school setting that have actual private businesses. So you can look up like an advocate for helping with work rights and see if there is somebody that has a job, has a company within your local area that would be a good resource, because they would be very much knowledgeable in regards to your rights within your particular state and local area that can be able to help you with that.
And you need to be proactive. If you think you're having problems at work because of Tourette's, you need to speak up about it. If you're being disciplined because of Tourette's, you need to make that clear. And also, I would say, if you can, put it in writing. If you had a company email, use that, because if you're going to end up in litigation, which hopefully you won't, a paper trail is very handy and very helpful.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Make sure the accommodations are in written form and that you have a copy as well as the employer has a copy. So a lot of times I have talked to some of my clients who have said, hey, they're not following through with my accommodations. And I often will ask them, well, do you have a copy of your accommodations? And the employer and this client that I have will say, no, I don't have a copy of the accommodations I gave them. And I'm like, so you should always keep a copy on both sides, whether it be so once you hand it into them, you should also have a copy of what is agreed upon between you and the employer, so that you can make sure that you're all on the same page. Does that make sense? But if you're having problems within your work setting currently, what I would recommend is certainly go back and recommend them. If you have that copy that I'm mentioning of your accommodations, you should bring it with you just to show that it is in writing that you guys both agreed upon this.
That's right. I mean, in Australia, I don't know what the law is in America, but Australia, if something is written down, it's legal tender. But if it's not, it's a legal document rather. But if it's said, it's hearsay. So always try and get something written down. I agree.
Okay, thank you again, Scott, Karen, and Dave, for a wonderful presentation. This is all the time that we have for this session. Once the session is closed, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we'd love to hear your feedback. You will also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to this a link to the recording of this webinar. Additionally, the webinar will be posted to the TAA's YouTube channel for those who are unable to participate today. So please share with your friends and family. We encourage you to reach out to us about this webinar or for other resources and opportunities to connect. On behalf of the Tourette Association, thank you again for joining us and taking the time to view our presentation. This presentation,
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
This presentation was presented free of charge thanks to our generous donors. If you appreciated this session, we welcome you to support the organization. May 15th starts Tourette Awareness Month, and we welcome everyone to get out and get active with Miles for Tourette. Visit tourette.org to learn more and to give. Have a good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for tuning in, and thank you to our presenters.
You guys.